Welcome to Fahrenheit 140.
Why 140? It's the temperature that water burns after 6 seconds. I'm Robert Mace.
And I'm Carrie Thompson, and we're the Fahrenheit 140 co-hosts covering the news you need to know about climate change in Texas.
This is your producer, Sarah Wingfield, welcoming you to today's bonus episode. This audio recording comes from the Meadow Center's Blue Bag Lunch and Learn series, a live webinar series about all things water and conservation. In this Blue Bag recording, you will hear Fahrenheit 140 host and executive director of the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment, Dr. Robert Mace, speaking about rainwater harvesting.
All right. So happy to speak to you all about rainwater harvesting. Title of my presentation is Reliable Rainwater is Just a Roof Away. And so what I hope to do by the end of this presentation is convince you that rainwater harvesting can be and is and could be a reliable source of rainwater, despite what you may have heard or may not have heard. And then also some interesting little tidbits about assessing reliable rainwater system. And then also ultimately, this work will result in posted spreadsheets that will allow folks different parts of the state to design reliable rainwater systems. And then, of course, the spreadsheet itself, you could put your own information in it, own rainfall in it, which makes it a tool available for wherever in the state, the country, or for that matter, the world, if there's rainfall information available. My co-author is Ricardo Briones. This was big part of his master's work that he did in the sustainability program out of the Department of Sociology here at Texas State University. So I just want to acknowledge that some funding was received to support Ricardo in his work from the Meadows Foundation endowments, one of which supports graduate fellows and research assistants, and another one for the Water Policy Program. And then also there's a little bit of support in here from the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Presentation today, first we'll talk about what is rainwater harvesting, in case you're a newbie, and then also to maybe talk about briefly some of the philosophical elements of what exactly is rainwater harvesting. Is rainwater reliable? Have a discussion there. We'll talk about calculating the firm yield of rainwater harvesting systems, present results from those calculations under reliable rainwater, talk about next steps, both for this project as well as opportunities for additional research, and end with conclusions. So what is rainwater harvesting? And in the traditional sense, which is how we're going to refer to it in this presentation and this work, is it's collection of rainwater off of a catchment, generally a roof or some human-made surface. I'll have discussions with people when I talk about rainwater harvesting about, well, reservoirs are rainwater harvesters, like big surface water reservoirs. Certainly true because they're giant catchment basins for rainwater. But then also they're funneling, rainwater that turns into runoff, that then goes into streams and rivers, that then goes into the reservoir. You could also make the argument groundwater systems are rainwater harvesting systems, where part of that flow winds up in storage in a groundwater system. Setting aside all those kind of weird philosophical things, it's basically coming off a human-made surface. This is something of a typical system here. You've got a catchment with a roof. You've got the water going into a gutter. It then gets directed from that gutter into a first flush. And this is basically a diversion that captures a certain volume of the initial runoff off the roof. So the bird crap, dry and wet deposition sediments. If you happen to have a coal plant out backyard, there might be some coal ash on there. That gets diverted here. Once this backs up, then the flow goes into a storage tank. There's generally an overflow on that storage tank, which is depicted here, and then the water is available for use. This particular schematic is showing a potable system. So you've got a treatment system, generally filters, a filtering system, maybe ultraviolet, a pump, which I would say I've got a potable system in Cloudcroft. Pump is usually before this stuff. This particular system has a backflow preventer, but it comes into the house. And of course, these systems can be used for outdoor use. The simplest system is probably a rain barrel, capturing that runoff, up to a system like this for full indoor potable use. This is the rainwater system I have at my place in Austin, just an example. So there's a 2-car garage, gutter, and then water's coming out here and then going into, in this case, a 5,000 gallon tank. I've got, it's called the levelator. This is actually an Australian design and tank, as is the levelator. So this is showing the actual water level in the tank. So this tank's a little less than a third full in this place. This tank is used for outdoor use, and I do gravity flow rather than a pump. Okay, is rainwater reliable? This is a quote from the 2012 State Water Plan that said this about rainwater harvesting. While it is often a component of municipal water conservation programs, rainwater harvesting was not recommended as a water management strategy to meet needs, since, like brush control, the volume of water may not be available during drought conditions. This is where the concept of firm yield comes into play. Firm yield is a concept associated with surface water reservoirs. And also it's the water planning we do in Texas that allows for supplies, reliable supplies during repeats of drought of record. And so, this statement here is basically like, it may not be available during drought. Therefore, it may not be a reliable source of water. Another interesting thing is, talks about it's often a component of municipal water conservation programs. And so rainwater harvesting does tend to often show up under the mantle of water conservation rather than water supply. I think in part that's because of maybe concerns of the reliability. And then also, I think in part because in urban settings, like for example, my system I just showed you in Austin, I'm conserving the original Austin water supply from Highland Lakes by using rainwater instead. So since this 2012, this is a quote from the 2012 plan. We did find that rainwater harvesting does show up as a strategy in the plan. I was at the board back in these days, and in talking to the planners, particularly grumpy engineers, it's like if it's not reliable during drought, then firm yield is zero. And they would even argue it shouldn't even be included as a strategy in the state water plan. We're seeing more of it in the state water plan, but based on our investigations, it's not presented as reliable supplies. And again, the board tends to wrap it up into demand management, which under the mantle of water conservation. In the most recent state water plan, this is how they define firm yield: the maximum water volume a reservoir can provide each year under a repeat of the drought of record using anticipated sedimentation rates and assuming that all senior water rights will be totally utilized in all applicable permit conditions met. So this is a very surface water specific definition. You could define a firm yield for an aquifer, for example. I generalized the definition into the maximum volume of water a source can provide each year under a repeat of the drought of record. Note that this is how Texas defines firm yield. Some other states define firm yield differently, sometimes statistically, like for the 1% drought. In Texas, it's a repeat of the worst drought of record. So a rainwater system is analogous to, catchment to a reservoir. There's rain on a catchment. This is the landscape versus a roof. There's storage in a reservoir. Rainwater system, it's storage in a tank. And then there's, uses that are used there as well as some other losses. There's some differences here where we have the luxury of first flushing stuff. And then also we're more efficient at collecting rainwater off of a roof than say over a basin where you lose rainwater through, infiltration into the soils, evaporation, evapotranspiration. In fact, probably losing 86% of the rainfall. And then another maybe 3% to groundwater, leaving something around maybe 10% of the rainfall actually making it to the reservoir. Where here, the vast majority of the rain that falls on this roof is getting into the tank. So there's a benefit there. You'll get evaporation off a free surface of a reservoir. Rainwater harvesting tanks are generally enclosed, certainly enclosed for potable system to keep the bats and the rats from getting in your tank and messing up your water supply. And then even if it's not a potable system, you're keeping that covered to keep the mosquitoes out. So evaporation is minimized. So there's actually some benefits to rainwater versus a reservoir. Now, benefit of a reservoir system, it's a hell of a lot bigger water supply in one place versus a more distributed water supply with rainwater harvesting. There's been a number of studies done, around the world and the country. This is one that the Meadow Center published, led by David Van Huysen, who's very active in the rainwater harvesting space, looking at development-wide rainwater harvesting as a water supply strategy. And I bring this up not to pick on David. He does really good work. He's a deep thinker on this topic. But I was at the board when, in fact, the board funded this project. I was at the board when this work came in, and reading the reports, it's envisioning this rainwater harvesting, and then you've got makeup water when your rainwater harvesting gets used up during really bad droughts. So you're hauling water, or maybe you have an on-site well. By definition, the firm yield is zero because the rainwater doesn't reliably get you through a repeat of the drought of record. It's not to say that there aren't benefits to having a rainwater harvesting system, like for example, if you had a rainwater harvesting system meeting 90% of your needs, you're using your water well that much less, so you're conserving water in place in the aquifer. However, there's some bigger policy issues at play here, because if that saved water from the water well isn't being pumped by you, maybe the regulatory scheme allows somebody else to pump that water. So have you really saved water? You certainly conserved it to make the supply extend more broadly, which quacks like conservation. So there's a benefit there. On the surface water side, unless a community or a city or a water provider is like setting aside, say, the surface water supply to kind of offset whatever gets provided by unreliable rainwater harvesting, then there's a potential management issue there, because let's say, for crazy dramatic example, let's say city of Austin pays half of Austin to meet all of their needs with rainwater harvesting. But the systems aren't designed in a way to provide water during a repeat of the drought or record. When a really bad drought comes along and all of those systems fail, they're going to need water. And so they're then going to be looking to the Highland Lakes to meet their water supply. But if Austin has already committed all that water to supply for additional growth, that can create a real problem. We're not at that point. The rainwater dreamers would be like, oh, that'd be great if everybody, was on rainwater harvesting. But if the rainwater harvesting is not reliable during a repeat of the drought or record, it means those folks are going to need to get water from somewhere else, and that could be a challenge for meeting those needs. And then I should note too that most of the practitioners I interact with that install rainwater harvesting systems, not all of them, but I'd say most of them that I've talked to, don't. Yeah, they always have that component of delivering water is built into it. And that can be a balance. A balancing of economics. But there's almost an expectation in the industry that you design a system that you're going to haul water for a certain amount of time, which also creates a storyline that it's not a reliable source of water. About 10 years ago, I gave this presentation to the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. This is related to that system in my backyard in Austin I showed you. And I worked at the board at the time, and the Water Development Board has a calculator, like a tank design calculator. It is still up on the agency's website. And I use that to size my tank. And so this blue line is what the calculator recommended out of the box. So probably a 3,000 gallon tank. It was based on average rainfall for every month for Austin. And so that was an issue when I kind of mapped this out. I'm like, oh, this is a problem. There's a starting storage issue. So like it starts with zero storage. You can see here that, this should probably carry over to here and maybe start with this, although, this is a problem. But increasing the tank volume, I was able to lift these average monthly values up to where I had enough water for the full year, which is about a 4,000 gallon tank instead of a 3,000 gallon tank. Now, again, these are based on averages. So I asked myself, what does average mean in Texas for rainfall? There's no such thing as average. Furthermore, it's like really interested in what the supply is during droughts. And that tank, the goal was to not use any city water outside. So I geeked out, modified that calculator to take daily rainfall with assumptions of use. And again, this is outdoor usage, so seasonal summer usage. Took that daily use, put that into a spreadsheet, and basically came up with I need 8,000 gallons of storage to make it through these droughts. Now this hits zero, but it's like it goes to zero and then it rains the next day. It goes to zero, rains the next day. So this told me that's like, there's something not quite right with this calculator. It could be misleading some folks on what the reliability or what their storage needs to be. Ultimately, I went with 5,000 gallons because I had to gone to 10,000, which would have doubled the cost from 5,000. So I made an economic decision. But with a 5,000 gallon tank, it was, it would fail during a few months, the drought of the 50s, and then 2009, interestingly enough. So I had in the back of my head that at some point, somebody needs to do a better job of this type of calculation using daily data. Didn't make it happen when I was at the board, and then I've had the dream of making that happen since I've been at Texas State, and that's what this study is about. So one question might be, why firm yield? Because I've been asked this question by some of the practitioners. It's 100% reliable. I put 100% in quotes because we can always have a drought worse than the drought of record. And when you look at the past data, you're not considering climate change. But presumably, firm yield is the current planning standard in Texas. You can avoid tank anxiety. So, like even with our tank for outdoor use, when the tank gets low, my wife will remind me every day that the tank's low. Tank's looking low. And then imagine the anxiety you would have if you were relying on that rainwater for your indoor use. And so again, kind of ups the tank anxiety. Also, the cost of a firm system may minimize overall cost. Now, I talked about my system going from kind of what the board recommended to board's spreadsheet would recommend to a firm would double the cost, but also note that that's a seasonal usage. But there's also, like when practitioners balance those costs, the economics are the cost of storage compared to the cost of hauling water. I would say that there's additional cost to when you run out of water. There's the anxiety cost. So how much do psychologists cost when you have really bad tank anxiety, or just the worrying? And then also it takes time to kind of deal with the issue that doesn't necessarily get included in there. At the very least, I feel like homeowners or users should know what the firm system looks like to see if that increase in cost is worth it or not. I also think the firm yield increases site, local, and regional resilience, and this is related to collecting rainwater itself, but then also how rainwater harvesting fits into the broader supplies. If it's firm, it's reliable. You don't need makeup water from another supply that also has a firm yield associated with it. So having 100% reliable rainwater systems just increases everybody's resilience. So let's talk about calculating firm yield. So step one, find a grad student. When I was been kind of trolling for grad students for a while over here, couldn't find anyone interested, and I kind of reached a point where I'd given up. I'm like, well, I'll just keep this on the list, and maybe someday. And then, kid you not, the next day, Ricardo Briones walked in my office and said he wanted to do some work on rainwater harvesting. I was like, have I got the project for you? This was us when we were going on a rainwater harvesting tour of Central Texas. Go take a look at some systems. And then this is at the Meadow Center, where we've got this beautiful tank behind us. So first up was a governing equation. And really, this is just simple mass balance or a water balance. This looks complicated, but it's really not. It basically says the volume of the tank today is equal to the volume of the tank yesterday, plus the runoff off the roof, which is a function of rainfall, catchment area, and a runoff coefficient. So how efficient rain converts to runoff off the roof, minus the volume of the first flush, minus the volume of the daily use. And then these are like, what happens if there's not enough rain? In other words, there's not enough rain to overcome the first flush. We set the first flush equal to this such that it's 0. So there's no change here. We have a condition here that if the tank's full, we cap it at full. If the tank's empty, we cap the bottom at empty. So pretty simple. What goes in equals what comes out. And then we turn that into an Excel spreadsheet to do the calculations. Called it RAINFAL, Rainwater Assessment and Interactive Enumerator for Firm Yield Analysis Limits. Had to work hard for that one. And we've got the daily precip that you can put in. You've got different parameters you can put in over here. We've got a graph that shows you what the storage amount is in gallons over here. And then you can make changes to your usage, volume of storage, volume of your catchment, area of your catchment, and then see what the response is. For calculating firm yields, it was an iterative process of, adjusting these numbers to get slightly more than 5% of the total storage. And basically, we left the dead pool at the bottom of the tanks. Typically, you don't get all the water out of the tanks. For a potable system, you don't want all the water out of the tanks because stuff will settle out at the bottom. But that also serves, just like in real life, because reservoirs in real life have dead pools, that also kind of serves as an emergency supply. So it's a little bit of a buffer benefit there as well. So systems assumption, first flush is 50 gallons. And I put these little dots here to remind me to say that we're revisiting, we're doing a reanalysis of what I'm showing you today to where the first flush is a function of the roof area to make an improvement to what we did. But for what I'm going to show you today, it's assuming no matter how big the roof is, it's 50 gallons for the first flush. Runoff coefficient of 0.92. So for every 100 gallons that falls on the roof, 92 gallons go into the tank or go into the system, because that all doesn't go in the tank because we've got 50 gallons in the first flush. We did a starting storage of 60% as an initial condition, but we tested for independence from the initial condition. By that, when we calculated firm yields, we made sure that if the starting storage varied, it didn't affect the final result. And if it did, we just noted it. 5% dead pool, we talked about that. There's another dead pool. Optimized to 3 significant figures. So if the storage was 90,000, we didn't do it 89,552. We would do it to 91,500. Just to since we're going back and forth by hand. We have a version now that does an iterative calculation, but it's not reliable. So we don't anticipate releasing that to the public. We assume that catchment captures all precipitation. We assume no evaporative losses. And then snow, what's snow? Any of the precipitation that falls, we're assuming it's all liquid and it's all making it through the system. That does become more of an issue in the northern parts of the state. Analysis assumptions. We assumed a typical new home catchment of 3,181 square feet, single-story home. You could argue that's on the large side. This includes eaves. This is based on kind of average home construction in Texas today. And again, we assume a full catch. In other words, all of the catchment on the roof is going into the tank. Typical occupancy of a home in Texas is 2.76 people. If you've got someone in your household and you're like, that person's not all the way there, that's that 0.76 person right there. We investigated a range of use from 10 gallons per person per day to 60. For this analysis, we did this. We realized later that it really doesn't matter what the water is used for, and got away from this per person day and just looked at general use. So when a Meadows report comes out, it'll look a little different than what you see here today. Determine that a reasonable system has 30,000 gallons of storage. Put reasonable in quotes because, of course, that's arguable. Here in Central Texas, a lot of the installers will it's kind of an assumption that if you put in a Rainwater Reliable house in the hill country, it's going to need about 30,000 gallons of storage. Yeah, 30,000 gallons of storage. I did hear at the last American Rain Catchers meeting, one installer said that 40,000 is the new 30,000. So maybe chalk that up to climate change. We also assume that there was no outdoor use. So this is consistent daily use. Rainwater harvesters that rely on rainwater for their potable use generally do not use their rainwater for outdoor use. If they do, it's usually kind of a separate system, just because of that tank anxiety on your supply. We did not consider economics, so we're going with firm yield, regardless of balancing it with hauling water. And we use the available daily precipitation information that we could get from the National Weather Service. Generally, it's about 60 to 80, even 100 years. But that does vary. Sometimes, we didn't get good data during the 50s, during the drought of the 50s, but most cases we did get the drought of the 50s in there. So the cities that we looked at, we were doing this study in part to help inform regional water planning groups about the potential value and use of rainwater harvesting as a supply, not just a water conservation tool. And so we sought to choose at least one place in every regional water planning area. If in long, stretchy planning areas, we would choose a couple, so like Region M, Brazos G, Region F. We chose two. Otherwise, here we go, Region E, El Paso, Fort Davis. Otherwise, if it was pretty central, Northeast Texas, we'd have loved a site in the middle. But that was the other controlling factor, was a site with a long-term record. So we wound up doing Texarkana. And then we tested the system. There's a couple ways we tested it. One was kind of looking at a hill country, kind of Austin, San Antonio. Did the 30,000 guesstimate that installers used, did it look like it conforms with that? And actually, it did. And then also took a look here in Austin, where I've got a friend who lives in Bastrop, completely off the grid, and uses 10 gallons per person per day. He's only one person, as you might imagine, but and he has like a 3,000 or 3,300 gallon, 3,000 gallon tank that he uses, that he said he's gotten through all these recent droughts in Central Texas. So we kind of used this to, of course, that's all hearsay and anecdotal. So we're kind of both if we took him at his word, testing if our spreadsheet worked, but then also seeing if he was full of crap. And it turns out he's not full of crap. He could probably even do a much smaller system. So here's a tank in Austin for 2.76 people using 10 gallons per person per day. Could meet those needs with 3,300 gallons of storage with that 3,181 square foot roof. You'll notice here we've got, again, we got 5% of storage. We monkeyed with the values, in this case, the tank storage, until this was above this, as low as we could get given the sig figs. And then we also calculate reliability. And reliability is the number of days with water divided by the total number of days in the record. And so firm yield, it's 100%, quote unquote, 100% reliable water. And so we see that here. Now that we have this model, you can kind of do some interesting things. And one thing, this was an accidental thing where I'm like, okay, I'm going to kick it up now to, I think 20. Let's see what it looks like. So I kick it up to 20, and you can see that the tank goes dry many multiple times. In fact, there's 60 dry days over this record. But it's interesting too. I mean, there's definitely some episodes of quite a few dry days, but they're spread out through the whole area. And this is at 99.81% reliability. And these folks, would be hauling water each of these times. Now, they've been actually pretty reliable since, maybe 2015. They wouldn't have to have hauled water, but, it's like a little bit more storage. In this case, 7,340 gallons more storage to meet 20 gallons per person per day with 0 dry days. So you can start seeing some interesting things pop out of this little spreadsheet model. All right, let's talk about reliable rainwater. So what we have here is the amount of use. Now, this is no longer per capita per day. This is total use versus catchment area. So the catchment area goes higher for each of these versus different locations. And storage is fixed at 30,000 gallons. And then we limited the top catchment to less than 70,000 square feet because you could just keep getting a bigger roof to meet your needs. There's, I guess, you wouldn't want a roof as big as Texas to meet needs for practical reasons, but you can keep making a bigger roof to catch more rainfall. So I've also ordered these from most amenable to rainwater harvesting to least amenable. However, all these places can have reliable rainwater, just depending on how much water you need. And so, and how much roof area you can afford and how much storage you can afford or are willing to do. So obviously Houston's pretty easy to do with less than 5,000 square foot roof, through the full range of use. And then as we move towards less rainwater harvesting friendly locales, it gets a little harder. You need a lot more roof, but if you can keep your use down, I would say a water efficient household without being crazy water efficient can get by on 25 gallons per person per day. So let's say 3 people, 75, maybe round it up to 80 and make it easy to look. It's starting to become, pretty doable in Lubbock, Del Rio. You need quite a bit of roof to do it in El Paso. But maybe you can do your own community rainwater harvesting project by getting your neighbor's roof area, which I've got a friend in Austin that does that. So this is just simply showing using the tool to kind of look at what the potential is. If we zoom in with everybody on the same map, we cap out the roof area at 10,000 square feet. You can see here that, you can get quite a bit of water in our easternmost communities with reasonably sized catchment. And then there's kind of a big grouping here in the middle. And interestingly enough, Wichita Falls, we kind of go with the 80, it's 3,000 square foot roof. I mean, all these places can actually do pretty good. We've got a grouping here, Amarillo, San Angelo, Laredo, Del Rio, Lubbock. Becomes more of a challenge. And then, of course, really becomes a challenge in the drier western regions, but it's not impossible. Also realized looking at this that, like, if there's a big box store that wants to use rainwater for flushing toilets and urinals, this tool could be used. You might have larger roof areas to create a reliable supply with 30,000 gallons of storage. These curves will look different if I kick the storage up to 40, up to 50, down to 20. Point is with the tools, you can put in whatever you want and kind of see what it is that you can achieve. These plots are now use versus storage with a consistent catchment. So the catchment is fixed. And again, I have them oriented from most amenable to rainwater harvesting to least. Here, all of these lines go until they don't work anymore. So with a fixed catchment, eventually you don't have enough rain to meet your needs, and there is no firm yield. And so you'll see that, like in Corpus Christi, we can get upwards around 130 gallons a day of firm supply, drought-proof supply. But nothing beyond that. We can't do anything beyond that. El Paso only has 1 point with this catchment. Around 30. So if my pal in Bastrop that lives off the grid had 2 other folks living with him that were the same use the same amount of water. He could do a system in El Paso with actually not that much storage, less than 20,000 gallons of storage. Here's that same data, again, zoomed in, capped out the storage at 50,000 gallons here, just to kind of look. Again, our eastern counties look easier to do. There's this grouping here, and there's kind of a big old group here. So again, just kind of depends on, like, let's say 40,000 is a reasonable tank size. I mean, there's a lot underneath this. It's like Midland, you could get 40 gallons a day. You're not going to do a full family with that, but again, you could increase your catchment. Maybe you're pulling water off the barn too, or maybe you build a lean-to pole barn for your classic car collection. You collect rainwater off and get enough rainwater. The point is that you can calculate these firm, reliable yields wherever you're at in the state. There's poor old El Paso. This is a map that Ricardo and I put together for Texas Water Trade, kind of inspired by them asking questions. And it's just showing firm yields for 3,000 square feet of catchment and 30,000 gallons of storage across the state. And we calculated each of these red dots. We were forced to go in New Mexico to kind of work out the contours. And so you can kind of see, that yield increases as you get over here. This is kind of interesting because things get tighter and all of a sudden it opens up again. And that's because, we've limited ourselves on catchment and gallons of storage. And so you reach a point where you've topped out the system with so much rain that, you really need to increase your catchment or your storage to get a higher yield than shown here. But this is just for demonstration purposes to kind of let people know that it's possible with a, reasonable parameters to get a firm, reliable yield. One surprising outcome from this, we spent a bit of time investigating this because at first we thought we had made a mistake, was that calling it different droughts for different spouts. So here's an example, Wichita Falls, 30,000 gallons of storage, 27.6 gallons of daily use. And we optimize the catchment. So with at least 804 square feet, we can meet this daily use through the drought record. And here you can see it takes a long time to get down here, decades to get down here, but where it bottoms out is in the 1970s. Then if we do 15 gallons per person, 41.1 gallons, we have to kick the catchment up to at least 1,156 square feet. Now that drought of record ends in the 1950s. Now let's go to 55.2 gallons of firm yield or firm supply. Catchment needs to be about 1,600 square feet. Now that defining drought shows up in the 2010s. And what we realized is that, am I familiar with firm yields are like Lake Travis, Lake Buchanan, the big reservoirs that we have around the state. But what we learned from these exercises is not just the rainfall and the size of the catchment, but it's also the size of the container or the storage. And so how big your roof is, how big your tank is, defines, and how much water you need, defines which drought governs your supply getting through a drought record. So just an interesting aside there. Oftentimes I hear people say when I talk about rainwater, it's like you're stealing surface water. You're stealing water from somebody else. So went through a little calculation here of what would happen if every roof in Texas captured rainwater. And when I say capture rainwater, captures every drop of rainwater that falls on it. If you do that, and it turns out there's sources for roof area because the solar people have done that analysis, that remote sensing analysis. If you did that, that would be 600,000 acre feet a year of rainwater harvested. That's 0.16% of rainfall. That's also 0.18% of runoff. And this is accounting for evapotranspiration losses. Because remember, like in Texas, 86% of what falls out of the sky goes right back up into the sky. There's also losses to surface water from groundwater. And when you take that to account, you're taking 0.18% of runoff. And I know what some of y'all are thinking, that's my water. That's my surface water. You're taking 0.18%. I want every last fraction of water. Okay. There's 13 times as much non-roof impervious cover as roof area across the state. And so, as we all know, impervious cover increases runoff. And so if we assume that that is increasing runoff because we're avoiding these evapotranspiration losses, there's an extra 5.5 million acre feet of runoff from non-roof impervious cover. So end of the day, you can collect rainwater guilt-free. Next steps, we're going to publish the Meadow Center's report and the rainfall sheets. So everybody will have access to those spreadsheets to use, whether for the locations we put them in or to put their own daily rainfall data into them and then do their own analysis. And then working with Anna and her magic, we'll get that information out there, get a press release out, really seeking to change the discussion on rainwater harvesting on it is a reliable source of water. You can use this in a way that is firm water supply, and you don't have to design a system with backup water supplies. We're doing a quick reanalysis now. We went through. It's kind of one of those things you go through a study, you get to the end, you're like, oh man, I wish I did that different. Wish I did that different. We're going ahead and doing that before we publish the Senate report. We then plan to publish a peer-reviewed journal article. We didn't talk about it in this presentation, but the literature has some strange ways of calculating and estimating the reliability of rainwater harvesting systems. And so we want to definitely publish a paper showing kind of how we're doing it, which is I would call kind of the standard engineering way of doing it for surface water supplies. Want to look at climate change. We've done a little bit of that so far. I need to find a student to kind of take that to where it needs to go. Some potential future studies, building in a seasonal use component to have an outdoor use component, building condensate harvesting as a conjunctive source. Both of these two are inspired by kind of Austin's use of rainwater harvesting and condensate harvesting. Over these recent droughts, the condensate harvesting has kind of gotten them through the dry summer months, and then the rainwater is kind of lifted them up. And so working together, they've been able to meet outdoor needs. So kind of want to take a look at that. I think that's kind of interesting. And can that be designed in a firm way? I think the answer is yes. Look at sensitivity to first flush volumes. There's some new literature out there that suggests you need a lot more than 50 gallons or much more than 10 gallons per 1,000 square feet of first flush to kind of remove potential contaminants. So we want to look at that. And then I think more broadly, kind of stepping back, looking at the big picture of how rainwater harvesting, whether it's reliable or not, can be resiliently built into water resources for communities. So conclusions, say it's easy, put in quotes, because easy is up to the rainwater harvesting installer to achieve a firm yield for rainwater harvesting in most of Texas. And you can do it in the entire state. It's just a function of how much water do you need. There's a larger swath of the state that could employ reliable rainwater harvesting than understood, like Wichita Falls. It's on a transition of it's really dry. They really struggle with their surface water resources and drought, but their rainfall is actually not that bad. And so rainwater, to me at least, was kind of a surprisingly good alternative supply up there for folks. The drought of record for rainwater system depends on the rainwater system in addition to the rainfall. So I think that's an argument for using the full period of record and using the daily numbers. High reliability, less than 100%, may mean frequent water hauling. So that's an argument for maybe designing these firm systems. And then finally, rainwater harvesting ain't stealing your surface water. And I think finally, this study shows that we need to change the dialogue on rainwater harvesting and talk about it as not a water conservation strategy, but as a water supply strategy that is available during repeats of the drought of record.
What a wonderful presentation about rainwater harvesting from Dr. Robert Mace. To watch the full webinar, including the Q&A, we have a link posted in our show notes, and we will also share a link to the published research and report for further reading. We'll be back with more bonus content next month. Thank you for listening.
Thank you all for being with us for another climate conversation. We hope you can take this information with you into your everyday life to help spread the knowledge and understanding of climate topics and their effects.
This podcast would certainly not be what it is without listeners like you. If you're listening through Spotify, take a quick moment to help us out and engage with the quiz and poll we've attached to this episode. And be sure to check the show notes for helpful links and resources.
Thank you to our funders for the Fahrenheit 140 podcast, both the Meadows Foundation and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We'd also like to thank our communications team, Anna Huff and Sarah Wingfield.
If you'd like to learn more about the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment and how to visit our vital spring lake for a ride in a glass-bottom boat here in San Marcos, Texas, be sure to visit our website, meadowcenter.txst.edu. We have a number of climate resources there, including free lesson plans for your K-12 curricula. Sign up for our newsletters to get news, updates, and event opportunities hot off the press. I'm Robert Mace.
And I'm Carrie Thompson. Thanks for being part of the conversation.